and welcome back to another video of Measure School, teaching you the data-driven way of digital marketing. My name is Julian, and today we are doing a live Q&A here on our channel to answer your Google Analytics, measurement, data studio, or any other questions you might have. Now, I see already there are a few people here in the chat, so if you can hear me and everything is all right with my techniques here, then we can get started. We have here Drazen. Let's start out. Put in your name or I got your name here, but where you actually seeing this from, I'd be interested, and then I can call you out here. So we have Joaquin from London. We have Hassan from Bangladesh. Who else do we have here? We have Koen from the Netherlands. Nope. We go over here. Who else do we have? We have Michael from the Philippines, Jeff from Chicago. All right. Marcus from Madrid, Spain. Cool to have you. And why is not my chat not actually going down? We have here Chris from Winnipeg, Michael from the USA, Spicer. Isn't that Spicer? Is that a town called Spicer in Minnesota? Okay, it's like Sean Spicer city. Okay, we have Jason from sound problem. We have a sound problem. Can you hear me, guys? Okay, you can hear me. We have Daniel from Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. We have Juan from Canary Islands. We have Mark from Aachen, Germany. We have David Hurst from Chichester. All right. I remember your name, David. We have Pierre from Nantes. We have Michael from the Philippines again. Yes. Lee Hurst from the US. Helpful Lee. Is that a town? Okay. And we have people here from Greece, from Korea. Sorry, I can't pronounce your name. And yeah, then cool to have you all here today. We are ready to answer your questions. So if you have a question, put them into the chat. Now, if you want to get really noticed, I want to give you a quick overview of what you can do. It's actually our super chat feature, which is on the right hand corner. You can go and click that little icon with the $sign on it, and then you get featured, and you can put in any amount that you want. It will help out a little bit of the channel and support what we do here at Measure School. So yeah, if you want to try it out, click that little dollar icon, donate something, and then that will also give you a spot in the chat, and I will call you out as well. But no pressure here. We are all here to just learn together. So let's get started. I had a few questions previously through the form that I sent out in the email that I sent out earlier. And let's start out with one of the first questions here. So we have a question from, let's go first with Mark's question. We'd like to put a dashboard up permanently in our office for users on site right now. Should we use Google Analytics or Data Studio? So great question, Mark. I think that on the one hand, Google Analytics has a dashboard functionality, but it was never built to actually be displayed on a big screen in the office, so to say. It's more for like quick analysis that you can do, and maybe have your or put your most important data that you have in Google Analytics anyways, put that onto a dashboard, and then you have access to it really quickly. With Google Data Studio is actually built that you can display it on a big screen, small screen, and so on. So it's a real dashboarding software. And I would say that this is one of the solutions that you can go with. There are obviously other solutions like paid solutions like Geckoboard, Clipfolio that have these built-in functionalities as well. And Google Analytics has an API that gives you real-time data. So if you want to have the real-time user information on there, then you could do that with Data Studio or these other dashboarding software, and then display it on a big screen. Now, does it make sense? I think it's one of these playful things that you might want to do in your office to put in a new, more of a like something's happening on the website kind of thing. It can be really exciting, but it gets really old really quickly. That's the experience that I've made with different companies that wanted to have such a dashboard, and I put it up, and after 1 or 2 weeks, they don't use it anymore because it's quite kind of fun to see how many people are on your website right now. But unless there are huge jumps because you do a TV advertising, the purpose isn't really there. Now, if you want to drive your team with different metrics, such as the sales that you have made or the sales team, how many calls came through, and so on, that would be a nice feature to have the metrics all sent in front of in the office. So I'd recommend that you go with Google Data Studio or one of the dashboarding software, because you can connect different tools to it and actually make this work for you. Now let's look in the chat. We already had a question in the chat. So if you go up, we had a question here from Jeff. And Jeff had, I have a client who has Google Tag Manager installed by an ad agency. They're a bit hostile, don't want to give me access. Can I have another separate instance of Google Tag Manager on the same site? Yes, you can. I have actually had different experiences with installing multiple Google Tag Manager instances on the page. You just need to be careful that it doesn't conflict, and that's where testing comes in. Now, I would recommend to work it out and get access to that one Google Tag Manager account. So you have a one single, I think the arguments are really, if you deploy all your tracking codes with one tool, you want to be able to control it from one tool. And you want to also be able to, if there's any errors, be able to connect or detect the wrongdoings in one or the other account. So if you have a hard-coded installation of Google Analytics, for example, so the actual tracking code on the page, it is easy to find out because that's actually happening on the page, and all the different debugging tools would point to that. Now, if you have different Google Tag Manager instances on the page and there's an error happening, where does this actually originate, right? If the web developer suddenly has problems with something in their JavaScript on the page, something doesn't get displayed, they are looking for this error back and forth and can't find it. Now, it could be in one of these accounts that you are responsible for or the other agency. So you see that there could be many different problems if you don't exactly have the rules and documentations in place to actually get two accounts on there. Because I've seen companies that have two accounts, one account being for like ad stuff, so Google Tag Manager, Google and AdWords, Facebook advertising, and so on. So all these advertiser codes, and some other codes, or one Google Tag Manager account was just for Google Analytics. So it showed just the Google Analytics codes. Now I'm thinking, why is that not scrolling forward? Probably have. Oh, cool. Okay, we have from Michael. He gave us a super chat here. He gave us 50 Philippine pesos. I don't know how much that is, but cool. Thank you, Michael. And he has a question. Is it possible to have two GTM IDs on one site? So this is basically a question that, who was it? Mike actually asked at the beginning. Jeff actually asked at the beginning. So yes, you can have them on both of the pages. They might conflict. I would test it very thoroughly, but normally Google Tag Manager opens up two trackers, so they work independently from each other, and you'd be able to make that work on your website with two accounts. And if you have different GTM IDs, then you would be able to connect them to each other. So you see that there could be many different problems if you don't exactly have the rules and documentations in place to actually get two accounts on there. And you want to be able to there are instances where this is useful and actually necessary because you don't get access, like Jeff had it before. I hope that helps out your question, and thank you for the super chat. Now, Vincent asked, hi, I'm from the Netherlands. I have a question about adding a Google Analytics tag. I can choose the Google Analytics settings or override with the GAUID variable. Can you explain the difference? Yes, I would suggest we quickly jump into a little demo here. So here's our Google Tag Manager account, and you are talking about this one here. So traditionally, you have these options here saying take the Google Analytics settings variable and put in later on the tracking ID. So the UAID would have something like 12312 here. Now you can put that into a Google Analytics settings variable. And this is a very useful feature. Why is this very useful? Well, if you imagine that you have multiple Google Analytics tags, so you would have an event tag for firing on button clicks, you have a transaction tag, you would actually need to go and build that you would actually need to go and tag that tracking ID every time and paste it into your different tags, right? So you would need to make up a new tag and have that tracking ID available. And who can remember that number? So a lot of people, and me included, were building a constant variable within Google Tag Manager. Now, variables are really just like placeholders. So you can store something in a certain place and it can be dynamically changed, or it can be stored within Google Tag Manager itself. So if I go over here, this brick icon means a variable. So if I would say if I go over here and I can build a constant variable, and we have that type as well right here. We could element constant right here. We can put in any value that we want. So if our UID number would be this part here, then whoops, we have a few problems with when I type in numbers. Then and save this. Then let me go back here. It's not as good as I thought, this whole shortcut thing that I set up here. So let me just fix this. All right. So now we have this constant variable in here, and this would be dynamically replaced with a number that I've put in previously. Now, this is what I've done. When you look at my old videos, this is all I do, because the settings variable wasn't actually available yet. This is a feature that came out a few months ago, and now you can actually enter this UID directly into a settings variable. So if you go here to a new variable, we can actually build our own tracking ID. Now the cool thing about this, and this is very important when you work with more sophisticated Google Analytics tracking, is that you can also define all these field to set options, the custom dimensions, and anything that you have with e-commerce tracking that you want to send with every Google Analytics hit over to Google Analytics. You would need to remember that and put that in all your tags again. So let's say I have a custom dimension of the value 1 and a dimension value of test. This is just an example. Now, to be precise, if it's hit scoped, we would need to transfer that in every single instance of our Google Analytics tag. So we would need to go into our event tags and type that in. We would need to go in our transaction tags and type that in. So the information gets transferred every time you would send a Google Analytics hit, because if it's missing, you have a missing data set. And now with the Google Analytics settings variable, we can type this in one time and it would be transferred to all of our tags where we use that Google Analytics settings variable. So it is something that I would recommend as a best practice to use that Google Analytics settings variable if you deploy Google Analytics tracking through Tag Manager and make that work as well. So use the Google Analytics settings variable if you have just one account that you actually use for your deployment to Google Analytics. So if you have multiples, then you might want to override. But the cool thing about this settings variable is also you have the option. So once you choose a Google Analytics settings variable here, you have the option to actually say, okay, I want to override certain settings. So we could say that we still want to do a anonymized IP, for example, in just this particular tag. So you have always the option to override. But for things like Google Analytics tracking IDs, I would just put this into a Google Analytics settings variable. All right, I hope this helped you out. Let's see if we have any more questions. Okay. Then we have a question from Korea. Do you have a framework when you do analysis? Sorry, I can't pronounce your name because I can't read Korean. Let's see. We should actually go over to this screen. And where's that question? Here. Do you have a analysis framework? So okay. I wouldn't say I have a particular one. It always depends on the question that is asked. So the first step is really being the question. Now, for me, it's always the second question: is the data even available to analyze this? So if you look at Google Analytics, it's a web tracking tool. So maybe you don't have all the data in the web tracking tool that you would need. And then you would need to pull it together into a tool like a spreadsheet software or an outside analysis software such as R or Tableau or Data Studio, where you can analyze the data actually. So it really depends on the question. First of all, what data are we looking at? Do we have all that data available? Do we need to gather and measure any data? Then you can go into the analysis, and analysis all about slicing and dicing your data so you can get to that crucial part of insights that you might want to get to, and or the question that you might want to have answered. So you might know that you have with Google Analytics a lot of page view data. Now, how can you dice that and slice that down so you can answer the question accurately? And the slicing and dicing is called differently in different scenarios, but in Google Analytics it's actually called a lot of that is called segmenting. So getting from a broad data set to a smaller and smaller and smaller data set so you can answer your question. So I would segment again to find out and answer different questions, because once you have your questions asked, you might get a quick answer, but then digging deeper into that question, thinking about the analysis question deeper and segmenting down and trying to figure out where is that nugget that we wanted to get to is a crucial part of any kind of analysis that I would do. But really it then depends on the tools that you have available. So in Google Analytics, we have many different tools available that you can segment your data further, but also filter it, add certain dimensions to it so it gives you more context. You could change the date range, for example. So all these different tools, there's no particular order that I would use and say, okay, this is how I analyze this particular problem. But you need to know all the tool sets that are available, and then you could go through and find out where is the actual nugget that I wanted to get to. So I would always start with a strong question, so the right question, see if you have the data available, and then dig into the data and use the tools that are available with the tool. You could also export it and connect it to other tools. So maybe you don't have the data available, but you need to correlate it to Facebook data. Then you would obviously need to bring that together first in order to do any kind of analysis. And then go from a broad data set further down and ask more questions to get to a real recommendation. So the goal should always be to to get to a recommendation, to get to an action, to get to a change on your website, or to a presentation that you would do for with your stakeholders to actually show them what this data or how this data impacts your business. I hope that helps. Vincent just gave us a super chat of €2.50. Thank you. And he says, thanks, have a beer. I will. Thank you, Vincent. And he also does he have a question? No, he also wrote, so use the constant in this new Google Analytics variable to have the additional settings that will also roam other tags. Yes. Again, the settings variables are really cool when it comes, or not variables in general are really cool in terms of making your tags more dynamic, so you don't have that as many, and you can really do some very effective stuff with that. I hope that helps. Let's go back to one question that was actually asked previously on the form. I think Chris is also here. I saw his name earlier. Chris Cole asked, I'm using ClickFunnels and I would like to be able to put all the sales data from an order page, order bumps and upsell pages into the data layer. ClickFunnels does not pass the order data in the URL string, so there's nothing for me to grab to put into the data layer. How can I do this if I can put the data into the data layer and send it to GA or a third-party vendor? Thank you for answering. So Chris, I'm not too familiar with ClickFunnels. I tried out the tool actually really quickly just last month. But again, this whole closed source system, right? I think I was like, ClickFunnels is a page builder, but also a funnel builder. But they do their job really well because they can market to people that just want to build a funnel, just want to build a sales page, just want to sell a product. And they are not very open when it comes to saying, okay, you can customize everything, because then the system breaks. And that might be the case when it comes to the data layer and so on, because you need to actually have access to the variables in the background to fill the data layer correctly. Now, when I look at ClickFunnels and wonder, okay, on the thank you page, we have a thank you page that has all these different products. The system somehow would need to remember what the user has bought and put it onto the page somehow, either on the page, or it needs to be in the URL, as you said, or even in a variable. So normal shop systems, like Shopify, for example, they give you the ability to, they give you different variables that you can put into the template. So Shopify is also kind of closed source, but they give you access to actually change the design around. Now, the only tip that I can give you when it comes to what did I want to say? To ClickFunnels is, if you think about the steps, so let's say the main product, and then did the user buy and or didn't he buy, and you do an upsell or a downsell, right? You could put into JavaScript, into the background of the page, you could build your own JavaScript, and this would be easily done by just injecting that into the page. So every page builder lets you put in custom HTML data, and in this custom HTML data you can just write a data layer push notification. So this would simply be surrounded by script tags. Now I'm paraphrasing here a bit because I can't do a live coding example, but you could say, okay, did the user buy something or didn't he? Because at that step, if this is an upsell or a downsell, you would actually know, did the user buy this product or not? And since ClickFunnels is not a shopping cart system, right? You don't have multiple products that the user can put into the cart and then buy. You would actually only need to know, did the user buy the previous step or didn't he buy the previous step? Put that into JavaScript, into a data layer, and then you have that information available in Google Tag Manager as well. And always do that on the next step page, right? So if this is your product page or your cart page, and then the next page would be an upsell, you would need to know, okay, the guy didn't buy my product, or he bought my product and now I want to upsell him, or it's a downsell and the guy didn't buy my product. Now it gets really complicated if the person can hop and hop. I don't know how your funnel is actually built, but I would just look at the next page and see how, if you can detect somehow, or you can pass over the value of if the user bought this product, I'm gonna display this on my website. And if you can do that, then you can also just put in the information into the data layer via a JavaScript object. Now, in terms of writing this JavaScript object, you would actually just need to have a JavaScript push method where you have your product in there and you know the name of the product probably. So you don't need to fill it kind of dynamically. And then you can fill your data layer. I hope this this clears things up for you. It's a bit abstract what I explained here, but I can't really show it on an example because I don't have access to ClickFunnels at the moment. So I hope this answers your question. Now we have another question in the chat from Nathan. Hey Julian, I'm using GTM. Let me just go to the chat back here. I'm using GTM, and is it possible for me to pull the referrer into a form submission so I can see where the inquiry came from? Yes, Nathan, this is possible. I would recommend either to, or first of all, I would recommend to check out our source cookie variable. I've built this a long time ago, but it's still valid. And there is where I use these techniques actually. Now, the problem is with the referrer information is only, every time you change from one page to the next page, it actually has a referrer. So normally with a normal HTTP request, you go from one page to the next page and a referrer information is transmitted. Now, the problem with your approach here is that the referrer is not the beginning of the session. So what you want to have for your form submission is the beginning of the session, right? You want to know if the user came from Facebook, you want to know if he came from Google, and so on. You don't want to know when he entered your contact page that the last page that he came from was actually your homepage. So that would be the actual referrer of that page. So you want to know the beginning of the session. And therefore, you need to be capturing the referrer at the beginning of when the user enters the website, and this can be done with Google Tag Manager. Then you need to store it into a cookie. This can also be done with Google Tag Manager. And then on the contact page, you would need to send this referrer information, or take this cookie information and fill it into a hidden form field in your form. So, and this would also be possible with Google Tag Manager with a little bit of JavaScript. So a while back, I built this source cookie variable that actually not only takes the last source, so where the user came from, but every time he comes back to the page, it puts it into a source cookie and then concatenates that information. So you will have that available if you want in your form later on in a hidden form field, or maybe you'd be able to send it as a custom dimension into Google Analytics, for example. But just be aware that there are some downsides. Sessions and the referrer information that Google picks up is in a certain model, or they have their own rules, and it's all done server side. So we can't really see how Google Analytics functions. I wouldn't necessarily be able to compare exactly the data when we get it into a cookie with your actual source cookie information and your Google Analytics information. So that might not be 100% accurate, but it will give you a good idea. And I would check out this source cookie variable. That's what it's called. Okay, one more question from the form that we had earlier. Let's go with Juan Carlos. John Carlos' question. He just wrote GTM for AMP and GTM for apps. Now, this is an interesting question that I get asked quite often, because people always ask me, how about Google Tag Manager for apps? How can we do that? Now for AMP, we actually did a video on that. I would encourage you to check out accelerated mobile pages. Now, but the same rule is for app pages. You're just dealing with a completely different set of rules there, because AMP pages are accelerated mobile pages. They are not web pages in a traditional sense. So JavaScript, all that you are used to from JavaScript in Google Tag Manager, as I do the videos and so on, is all based on the web, on modern web browsers, functions that they have access to, and things that we can track. With Google, with AMP and also with apps, this whole game changes, because a mobile phone doesn't work like a web browser, and an AMP page doesn't also work like a web browser, although they load kind of similarly, but it's not that easy in terms of implementing Google Tag Manager and tracking the same things and unifying the tracking. Now, for AMP, I would definitely tell you to check out our video. Maybe that will give you a few more ideas. For apps, I can say this, and I don't do many apps videos. I did one on how to install Firebase Analytics on an Android app, which was kind of a new experience, but also very time consuming, because I'm not I'm not a mobile developer or an Android developer, but I'm also not big in the whole Android space. So it took a really long time to wrap my head around this. But let me tell you this. So Google Tag Manager is completely different from Google Tag Manager on the web. It works differently, it's implemented differently, and it has a different purpose, I would say. So with Google Tag Manager, we can do a lot in the web and deploy our own tags. With Google Tag Manager on an Android or an iOS app, you actually still need to ask the developer to install the right calls, to have that SDK implemented into the apps, and be very, very about the events that you want to fire and so on. Now, the complication that came in almost a year ago is Google, what's it called now? Firebase Analytics? No, Google Analytics for Firebase, I think. Yeah, that's the new name. So with Google Analytics for Firebase, they actually deployed these tools for app developers, for mobile app developers specifically, that can make functions really or implementations really easily done in terms of like helper functions of like a database and also authentication and so on. Now, what they also announced was then Firebase Analytics, or Google Analytics for Firebase, how it's now called. And this tool set also enabled you with tracking. So the Google team or the Android team then decided, okay, or the Firebase team, then decided to say, okay, let's make this our prime destination for analytics data that is coming from mobile or from these real web apps or real applications from devices like Android or iOS. And that's when they decided to say, okay, Google Tag Manager shouldn't be the first instance where we send the data to. It should actually be Firebase, because Firebase is most likely already installed when people start building the app. So they switched it around, and now Google Tag Manager is actually relying on Firebase events. So what you would need to do in order to get Google Tag Manager running is to install the right Firebase SDK, but also Firebase events into your app. Then you would need to piggyback in Google Tag Manager and say, okay, these Firebase events, when this fires into Firebase, I also want to fire this into my other ad tool. And there are certain ad tools that are available, so you get a little bit more control. But there are 2 or 3 steps that you need to go through in order to make this all work. Needless to say, I would say that the implementation is much, it's much, not backwards, but it's not as innovative as what we have on the web, where a marketer can go in and actually deploy tags. it is more something that you need to very clearly define and work with the developer in order to make Google Tag Manager for Apps work for you if you want to use Google Tag Manager for Apps, because there are also possibilities to still do this hard-coded in a sense that you would fire certain tags to certain vendors and pick up that information as well. So I hope this answers your question kind of. I know it's a bit wishy-washy, but Google Tag Manager brought us a kind of a standardization in terms of tracking. That's why I can make all these videos, because it's like, okay, this is pretty straightforward for most of the websites. I mean, there are always cases that I can't predict. But with apps, there's really no way I could tell you how to install Google Tag Manager and make it work for you every time. And even if I could, the chances are that you would do it yourself are pretty slim, because most of the times the app developers are a whole nother realm of where we are in the mobile web world, where we can actually have a little bit of influence on the website itself. So I hope this helps you out a little bit as well. So do we have any other questions here in the chat? I can't answer all the questions, obviously, but let's see if there's a good question here from Must Member. We have, how can I track dynamic remarketing parameters with Google Analytics if I don't sorry, let me see. Okay, so let me see here. Okay, how can I track dynamic remarketing parameters with Google Analytics if I don't want to use AdWords dynamic remarketing tag in Tag Manager? How can I track dynamic remarketing parameters with Google Analytics? Okay, so Google Analytics actually has the capability of sending data to Google AdWords, and you can connect the both, and then you can send data over. You could even do this with the help of the remarketing functionality as well, but you need to get the right data, and the answer here is simply enhanced e-commerce tracking. So if you have enhanced e-commerce tracking installed and your products are already tagged correctly in the tool, so you know if a product was viewed and you have that informational data available in your tool, then you can send that over to AdWords through Google Analytics. Now, as far as I know, Google AdWords actually needs the product ID, and they also need the price of the product, and they need the name, maybe. I think the name, not necessarily the name. But these are 3 data points that normally get sent by product remarketing. And if you have them in your data layer, but also in the Google Analytics Enhanced E-commerce tracking, then you could be just connecting those tools and map them in the interface so they get sent over to Google AdWords. That said, yeah, it's more of a function of like, if I would set up a whole new implementation and the user, the client would have already have a enhanced e-commerce tracking implementation, then I'd be interested in saying, okay, hey, before we don't have Google Tag Manager maybe installed or so, we have that, but we have that information already in Google Analytics. Let's just connect that so we can do things faster. That said, I always think that once you want to look at information like the data information more closely and want to debug, actually, there's a step with Google Analytics that you can't really see through and see what data actually gets transferred to Google AdWords through Google Analytics. So the way that I usually go is still setting up the remarketing with the remarketing tag, so I can actually see with the GA debugger, or not the GA debugger, the tag assistant in Google Chrome, if the data gets sent correctly and we are getting all information that you would need. Okay, we have another question from Shai Yo Leap. When I click on an element on my site, GTM doesn't register any identifiable information in the variable after the click. How can I get info for this? What do you mean by in identifiable information? You probably mean that you can configure your trigger or your filters to track the right element. This is a very common problem. Now, there's no easy answer to this. If you really want to do it with Google Tag Manager, first thing is you could build a custom listener. You can look into that on Simo's side, for example. He has built custom listeners. The second thing is you could use the matches CSS selector option with the GTM element variable. Also more advanced, you would need to know how to write CSS selectors, and you would need to know how to use the matches CSS selector option within Google Tag Manager and how to make that work for you. Now the third option is to actually change your HTML. I know that sounds dumb, but for some people that's the easiest option, just to go in and change the button and add an ID or add a class or ask the developer to add a class or an ID, so that actually gets set up correctly. And then the third option is to find a workaround. So what is the page that actually people, when they click on the link, where do they go to, right? Maybe you could just fire a tag on the page view of the next page, if that's a funnel, so the user can go from different pages. Now there are many different workarounds, but to be honest, there's a lot of information out there that that once you dig into Google Tag Manager a bit more, there are always cases that don't fit correctly into your case. So you need to find one or two of these points that make sense for you. And it's really a a decision between resources here. Do I want to do the one thing because it's easier in Google Tag Manager? Do I want to hire a developer to actually change my website around? Or do I just add an ID to my element here, or change the theme or whatever? Now, I can't tell you what the right answer is, and this would warrant that I go to your page and actually look at it and tell you what I would do. But it really depends on all these different factors, so you would need to find out what is the best one for you. But unfortunately, the auto event triggers are built for a very certain set of websites that don't always work, and therefore you need to be flexible in your GTM implementation in order to make it work for you. I hope that helps. Let's see if there's another question that we haven't answered here yet. From the forum that I sent out earlier, how should we include the new payment forms in our enhanced e-commerce tracking setup? My question is related to the case where the steps are changing depending on the devices. For example, opt-in at the end of the Apple Pay mobile. Apple Pay mobile, I haven't actually gone through an Apple Pay flow yet, so I couldn't give you any recommendations here, but I get your point. So if your payment process is changing somehow and people are going back and forth between different pages, how could you change your funnel visualization in Google Analytics? And there's no easy answer to this. Now, if you have a premium account, you could set up multiple of these funnel steps. If you have normal account, everything that is sent into Google Analytics are actually events. So you could just try to consolidate them into one event and say, okay, every time this checkout event is fired, then the user has probably paid or something like that, or he has gone through the payment process step or so. So you don't, you can't actually put in this different data into the funnel visualization. take Google Analytics more as a data gathering tool than as an analysis tool. So you could always send in more events, more data point with secondary dimensions. So you know if the user went to Apple Pay, if he is on this device or whatever, and then pull that data information out of Google Analytics into a spreadsheet and make sense of it inside of a sheet or a Tableau or whatever to make this work for you, because Google Analytics is built for a very certain set of websites, or in most cases it doesn't actually work out of the box. You would need to customize it to your heart's content, and Google Analytics gives you some functionality for this, some funnels and so on, but they don't give you a case that works always. So that is my recommendation for you, Joanne. So Lee asked the question: if I embed Data Studio widget on multiple pages with analytics on the Data Studio, can I tell which pages the widget was viewed from the Data Studio widget analytics? So that's interesting, Lee. I have not played around with this embed functionality of Data Studio. Let me just pull it up really quickly, and maybe we can take a look here. Why doesn't this change? Sorry. Okay, let's try this. So I'm just gonna go into this here, and I know what you mean. We can now embed them as well. So there is apparently a, let me see. So here I can embed this report. Okay, so here we have an iframe, right? So the iframe actually would give you, it's basically just another website that fires into your website. So it can't really show you. All right, we are back online, I guess. Let's see if we can see you guys again. Sorry for the slight delay here. And we are back on. So I hope everybody can see me and hear me. No, Lee, it's not you. We had some connection issues. I don't know where I left off. So the question is, Lee, is there actual analytics on the page itself? So you could be tracking the iframe, that the iframe exists or loaded on the page, or that the user actually viewed the page, but it's not something that you'd be able to track inside of Google Analytics per se if the user has interacted with this iframe. I don't know if there are any kind of analytics within Data Studio that would give you any kind of information about this. Now this would be great. I've never seen this in here. How often this was actually seen. So I think you are talking about embedded in the, okay, report settings. Interesting. Then I learned something new here as well. So let me go over into the report settings. Why is that not opening? Here, Data Studio. Google Analytics. Okay. You can enter your Google Analytics ID. Right. I would say no, it's not possible. Now I understand your question, because if Google Analytics is installed on this page, then it is loaded on the iframe. So it's loaded inside of Google Analytics. Now Google Analytics, at that instance when the iframe is actually loaded, would not be able to talk to the parent frame and say, hey, what is the page that I'm actually currently on? So I wouldn't know any kind of functionality that actually would provide that in Google Analytics per se. So my guess would be no, because of this iframe issue. Iframes are really a bad thing to use if you want to make tracking work as well. So I hope that answers your question as well. Okay, guys, it's already 4 o'clock. Sorry for the the slight mishap there a moment ago when our internet connection was apparently gone. I hope I answered most of the questions. I'm really sorry if I missed anything, but I hope to do one of these sessions again. We had some super chats here, so really thankful for that. And I always encourage you to keep watching our videos and also ask the question right under the video that you are interested in. I go through these comments quite often. Now you might have noticed that I'm not too responsive via email anymore because I get a lot of these emails a day, so I really need to prioritize, and I only answer most of the questions from my actual students that are in my courses. So please be aware of that. But if you have any questions in future videos, just put them into the chat or into the description below, and then we'll be able to answer them as well. Right, so I hope you enjoyed this little installment here of our actual of our actual little live Q&A. It was a bit chaotic, but that's life. So today we want to wrap this thing up. So let's go over here. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, then give us a thumbs up, but also subscribe to our channel right over there, because we'll bring you new videos just like this one every week. Now, my name is Julian. Till next time.